The relationship between you and your computer used to be pretty simple. You bought the machine, you turned it on, and it did what you told it to do. You owned it, not the other way around. But somewhere along the line, tech monopolies decided to flip that script. Now, you boot up your PC and you are immediately bombarded by a hyper-monetized billboard that's constantly trying to upsell you on cloud storage, hijack your web searches, and politely inform you that your privacy is not that important. Nowhere is this grift more obvious than with Windows 11. When it launched, it felt less like an operating system and more like a hostile takeover of your own hardware. But an incredible thing happened recently. If you look at the massive Windows updates rolling out in early 2026, you'll see something almost unprecedented in modern tech. Microsoft surrendered. They actually backed down. After the last 3 years of relentless backlash, adoption strikes, and public humiliation from the cybersecurity community, a multi-trillion-dollar monopoly was forced to walk back its most aggressive anti-consumer features. We actually bullied Microsoft into fixing Windows 11. But don't get it twisted. They didn't cave because they suddenly developed empathy for your user experience. They caved because their bottom line was bleeding, and we threatened the one thing Wall Street cares about right now, their multi-billion-dollar AI strategy. Let's look at exactly how the internet went to war with Microsoft, the economic realities that forced their hand, and how you can apply this exact same leverage to the rest of the garbage these companies push out. And if you're tired of the endless ways corporations are trying to extract everything out of you, hit subscribe. It's free, and it actively hurts the feelings of a tech executive somewhere. To understand the sheer scale of the pushback, you have to look at the trap Microsoft originally set. When Windows 11 dropped in late 2021, the narrative was all about modernization and safety. They instituted strict, unbending hardware requirements, specifically mandating a Trusted Platform Module, or TPM 2.0 chip, and officially cutting off support for processors older than Intel's 8th gen or AMD's Ryzen 2000 series. Microsoft stood on stage and swore up and down that this was a non-negotiable security imperative. The modern web is a scary place, they said, and we absolutely must enforce hardware-level encryption to keep you safe from ransomware. Which sounds fantastic, right? Until you realize what they actually did was instantly render hundreds of millions of perfectly capable, high-speed computers officially obsolete. This was an ecosystem lock-in strategy masquerading as cybersecurity. If you had a blazing fast gaming rig with an Intel 7th gen i7 processor that could render 4K video without breaking a sweat, like I did, Microsoft essentially labeled it e-waste. As the October 2025 end-of-support date for Windows 10 crept closer, Canalys and other market research firms predicted a massive global hardware refresh cycle, expecting nearly 69 million PC shipments to the US alone in 2024. The PC manufacturers were salivating. The tech industry manufactured a crisis so they could sell you the cure. But consumers aren't completely stupid. People looked at their perfectly functional hardware, looked at the price of groceries, and just flat out said, nah. We'll get to the absolute panic this caused in Microsoft's accounting department in a minute, but the hardware extortion was only half the problem. The real friction started the second you actually managed to boot Windows 11 up. If you successfully navigated the forced Microsoft account login, you were greeted by the new Windows 11 user interface, and in the name of so-called simplicity, Microsoft ripped out decades of foundational functionality. The taskbar, the literal anchor of the Windows desktop experience since 1995, was gutted. You couldn't move it to the top or the sides of your screen. If you were a power user with a vertical monitor or an ultra-wide display, Microsoft basically told you to go cry about it. The classic right-click context menu was hidden behind a frustrating Show More Options button, adding a pointless extra click to actions people perform 100 times a day. Why intentionally break your own product? Because a simplified, locked-down UI is vastly easier to monetize. You see, if you let users endlessly customize their desktops, it becomes really hard to guarantee that a sponsored widget or a Game Pass advertisement is going to render perfectly in their visual field. Enshittification requires standardization. The Start menu was rebuilt to feature a permanent recommended section that you couldn't fully delete, leaving a massive empty void on your screen if you dared to turn off their suggestions. And the browser hostility was downright comical. Microsoft made it a complicated nightmare to switch your default web browser away from Microsoft Edge. They wanted that sweet, sweet Bing search ad revenue. It got so bad that competitors like Mozilla Firefox and Brave had to literally reverse engineer Microsoft's operating system just to create one-click default workarounds. Microsoft would issue a patch to break the workaround, Mozilla would patch their browser to bypass it again, and the whole thing looked like two toddlers fighting over a toy, except one of the toddlers was a $2 trillion corporation abusing its market dominance. It took the European Union rolling out the Digital Markets Act to finally force Microsoft to stop holding our web links hostage. But annoying UI changes and browser wars are just standard late-stage capitalism. People will complain on Reddit and eventually learn to live with the friction. The moment the collective internet actually snapped, the moment Microsoft crossed a line they couldn't PR their way out of, was when they decided that the concept of digital privacy was officially over. If you want to isolate the exact moment Microsoft realized they had pushed the consumer base too far, you have to look at the absolute catastrophe of Windows recall. In their desperate bid to shove artificial intelligence into every crevice of our lives, Microsoft announced Copilot plus PCs featuring a tool called Recall. The pitch was that AI would act like a photographic memory for your computer. To do this, Windows would silently take screenshots of everything you did, every email, every encrypted chat, every bank statement, every late-night browsing session, every few seconds. It would then run optical character recognition on these screenshots, compile all the text, and store it in an unencrypted SQLite database right there on your hard drive. And they were going to turn this on by default. The cybersecurity community went thermonuclear. Researchers like Kevin Beaumont immediately demonstrated how trivial it would be for an infostealer malware script to silently extract a user's entire digital life in milliseconds. It wasn't just a privacy nightmare. It was the most efficient, weaponized mass surveillance tool ever packaged into a consumer operating system. The backlash was crazy. Privacy regulators in the UK and EU immediately opened investigations. Massive enterprise clients, the companies that actually keep Microsoft's lights on, started threatening to halt their hardware upgrades entirely. Corporate IT departments do not want an AI casually taking screenshots of their proprietary source code and internal financial documents. The bullying worked. The public humiliation was so intense and so universally hostile that Microsoft pulled Recall from the launch schedule. They delayed it for months. When it finally limped out, it was completely neutered, switched to strictly opt-in, fully removable, and heavily gated behind biometric Windows Hello security. And the retreat didn't stop there. If you look at the Windows Insider builds from March 2026, Microsoft is actively stripping their AI, Copilot, out of basic apps like Notepad and Photos. They realized that cramming an AI chatbot into a simple text editor wasn't really making people more productive. The mental exhaustion of having an AI constantly interrupting your workflow finally resulted in a massive corporate pullback. But why? Why did they actually care that we were mad? Monopolies usually just ignore public outrage. What economic reality forced Microsoft to actually fix the operating system? The answer is October 14th, 2025. That was the official end of support date for Windows 10. That was the day Microsoft officially stopped providing free security updates for the most popular operating system on Earth. Their entire corporate strategy relied on the assumption that the sheer terror of getting hacked would force everyone to throw away their old PCs, buy new TPM 2.0 compliant hardware, and migrate to Windows 11. But we didn't do it. We went on strike. By the time the October 2025 deadline rolled around, the data from StatCounter and other analytics firms was devastating. Windows 10 still held on to a massive chunk of the global market share, eventually hovering around 36% at the start of 2026. Over a third of the planet simply refused to budge. Businesses and home users alike looked at the forced Microsoft accounts, the baked-in advertisements, the e-waste hardware requirements, and the privacy nightmare of Copilot, and they collectively said, "No thanks, I'll take my chances with the malware." Now, Microsoft isn't stupid. They knew people would hold out, so they rolled out the Extended Security Updates (ESU) program. If you wanted to stay safe on Windows 10 in 2026, you had to pay the mafia for protection. They charged consumers $30 for the first year, and businesses got hit with $61 per device, with the price scaling up exponentially every year after that. On paper, this looks like a win for Microsoft. They get to squeeze a subscription fee out of an old operating system. But in reality, this was a disaster for their true objective. Microsoft doesn't want your $30 ESU fee. They want your entire corporate IT budget. Wall Street has priced Microsoft stock based on the assumption that they will flawlessly execute the AI revolution. They poured $12 billion into OpenAI. They desperately need to sell enterprise Copilot subscriptions at $30 a head every single month forever. Here is the mechanical truth of the situation. If a user is stubbornly sitting on a Windows 10 machine from 2019 because they hate the Windows 11 interface, Microsoft cannot sell them next-generation AI services. The adoption strike was directly threatening their primary avenue for future revenue. They realized that the friction they introduced to squeeze a few extra pennies out of Bing searches and start menu widget ads was actively jeopardizing their multi-billion-dollar AI enterprise strategy. They had to make Windows 11 palatable and fast. So, the March 2026 updates rolled out. And what do you know? Suddenly, the taskbar isn't locked to the bottom of the screen anymore. You can finally move it to the top or the sides, a feature people had been begging for since 2021. The AI clutter was dialed back. The File Explorer was optimized to stop flickering. They backed off the aggressive Copilot integrations and started acting like an operating system company again. We bullied them into fixing it by threatening their adoption metrics. We weaponized their own desperation for growth against them. Look, let's be totally clear. Microsoft is not your friend, and this isn't a fairy tale ending. We won a battle, but the war of enshittification is ongoing and structural. Even with the concessions in early 2026, Windows 11 is still structurally designed to harvest your data. The Start menu still forces a recommended section on you. You still have to jump through hoops to set up a local account. If you hit the Windows key and type a web search, it still ignores your default browser and forces you into Bing. The e-waste hardware cutoffs were never reversed. But what the Windows 11 saga proves is that absolute tech monopolies are actually incredibly fragile when their core growth metrics are threatened. When you refuse to adopt the friction, when you hold on to your old hardware, use reverse-engineered software, and publicly humiliate their privacy overreaches, the machine stutters. They are forced to negotiate. Consumer leverage still exists, but you have to actually use it. If this dive into the absolute absurdity of the modern digital economy resonated with you, there is a link on screen right now to my other video on how YouTube ads are getting worse on purpose. It's a breakdown of the exact psychological and economic tactics platforms use to force you into premium subscriptions, and you are definitely going to want to see the math on that one. Drop a like, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.